Welcome to the publishing panel. My name is Cherie. I'm the Senior Research Grants Officer at Alzheimer Society, and we're going to be talking all things publishing. What we want to do is kind of lift the lid on publishing with three very different perspectives, but hopefully all together it will answer any questions that you have. We'll have each speaker talk at the beginning. They'll have around 10 minutes to give a presentation, and then at the end of all of the presentations, we'll have a Q&A panel discussion, and everyone will be able to ask questions at that point. So we won't ask questions in between each speaker, but at the end, please write down your questions, and then we'll get to them. So I've no further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Jo Jackson. So yeah, I can give you the mic, and here you go.
Thank you again for the invite to speak here today. I thought I would talk you through the publishing process from the scientist perspective. So when you're in it, and kind of thinking through the things that I wish I'd been told when I was a more junior an ECR. So I think first of all, and it kind of goes on what Richard was saying earlier, is like, what is scientific publishing? I mean, we all know what it is, but why are we doing it? And so, I think the main thing to think about is we are trying to disseminate knowledge that we have generated. It's very easy to get hung up with impact factors and citations and H-index and all these things, but really we want to get our findings out there. It also serves as a quality control through the peer review process and to contribute to the scientific record. And I think we need to bear in mind that someone with Alzheimer's or their family probably doesn't care how many citations that papers have got. But what they do care about is, has it just inched knowledge a little step further that may then ultimately lead to a drug or a cure? So for the purposes of today, there's many different types of publications. For the purposes of today, I'm going to focus really on original research publications. I have written some reviews as well, but I won't really touch upon those today. And then also preprints. And I will highlight some of the papers where we have released it as a preprint before the actual papers come out. So there are a number of different steps in the publishing process. And again, I think we think this is a very linear process. In theory, it's very straightforward. In practice, it's a little different. So we obviously have to prepare the manuscript. This includes writing the paper, but also data collection. And then we have to pick a target journal. And all groups will do that differently. All group leaders will do that differently. And it's about being realistic, but also, getting it into the best journal. And I mean best as in the most appropriate, and that could be for the audience, as you can. You also, thankfully, this doesn't happen as much now, but you need to then bear in mind the journal requirements, and then also the authorship of the paper. You then submit the manuscript. This can be a bit of an onerous process. You have to put in a lot of information into the portals to upload the manuscripts. And then, hopefully, it goes through the peer review process. And there are a number of things to bear in mind in this peer review process. One is that how the reviewers are maybe selected, and you can recommend or exclude reviewers that you would like to review your paper. Also, there's now a bit of a system coming in about double-blind reviewing. Most of it is single-blinded, but I think there's some trials where both sides are blind to the authors and the reviewers. And also really thinking about what is the purpose of the reviewers. There's a lot of memes going out, everyone hates reviewer 2 and all this kind of thing. But if you think about it, and particularly now when I'm reviewing other papers, really the reviewer's job is to get that paper in the best form it can be. That, in my opinion, and maybe we can discuss that. But it's not necessarily to catch people out. Of course, we want to make sure the data is robust, but it is seen, I believe, to help that paper be the best version of itself and to improve the clarity of the research. You then get the good old editor's decision, and if you like refreshing web pages a million times a day, this is that stage. Great if it's accepted. Often it gets sent back to you with reviewers' comments, or sometimes it's rejected either before or after the review process. You then go through revisions and reply to the reviewers' comments, and then again, all being well, you then move on to acceptance and then publication, you do proofreading and these kind of things. I think one part that we all forget about is the post-publication process. And this has changed since when I went into science, everyone would get the lab would get their copy of Nature and people would flick through that. Now, a lot of it is through social media. So actually, when you are, hopefully, your paper is out there, you have to do a bit of self-promotion to really get that known in the field. So I wanted to then talk you through this process with a bit more kind of a realistic angle. So we start with the data collection. So as a group leader, when my group are collecting their data, running the experiments, I've started to bear in mind the rough outline of a paper. And I've highlighted each step here and some of the papers that are kind of in the works. And so I've started to think about that at the data collection stage. I then put together an early draft, or the researcher who's leading it will put together an early draft. This is where they've got some rough versions of figures, an outline, starting to write some of the sections, before moving on to a late draft, which is where the figures are a lot more polished. Most of the text is there, we're happy, it's gone back and forth a few times. For me personally, as you can see, there's a couple of papers at this stage. I find that the last tweaks are often the most difficult, just to get them done before you then move on to submission. Then it goes through the peer review process. You will then often have to reply to the reviewers' comments, make some revisions before most of the time going back to peer review. And then hopefully you are lucky and it gets accepted. And as I said, we have to bear in mind the post-publication process. But just to give you a realistic view on this, there are a few times where you go from the early review back to data collection. The submission, it may get rejected straight away, desk rejected as it's known, and you end up submitting somewhere else. Peer review, again, can get rejected. You go back to submission to another journal. Peer review, you then rethink the whole thing, maybe go back to your late draft. Peer review can go back to revision. That process can go on a number of times. Or peer review, and actually it ends up then getting rejected after peer review and you go back to submission. So what you end up with is this kind of terrible game of snakes and ladders, right? But unfortunately, there's more snakes than ladders. But this, from what I understand from my colleagues, this is normal. This is our perspective, my perspective, but also this happens with almost all research groups out there. So I'm going to, just before I finish, you can see here the papers that I have at each step of the process. And so as a PI, my job is to keep ushering them through this pipeline. And that actually takes quite a bit of time, just keeping an eye on everything. But ideally, you have a few staggered along the way to keep that pipeline going. So I will leave it there and hope I've given you a brief perspective from a scientist's point of view.
But we'll move on to Dr. Simon Andrews.
Okay, I'm going to talk about a slightly different thing. So I'm going to think about papers from a a slightly sort of orthogonal perspective. I'm going to try and convince you that papers should be entertaining. What you're trying to do in much of the publication that you're going to do is to sell your work. Okay, you're going to try and convince other people that what you did is interesting, they're going to engage with that, and that's going to give impact to your work and will encourage other people to follow up on that. Which means that a lot of what you're going to do in papers is to build a story in the same way that you would if you were writing a film or anything like that, which means that you need to have the essential components. How many times have you read a paper and then found that there isn't enough background in there, that if you didn't know enough about it, actually you're lost within the first sort of paragraph? So sufficient scene setting that somebody who maybe isn't as au fait with the topic that you're discussing is still able to take this. You need some kind of narrative arc. When we're getting people to write papers, we actually get them to plot out what their story is going to be, much in the way that you would for any other kind of story. What are the sections that you're going through, and what is the logical structure that you're going to build? Things that you're saying in the paper often depend on the previous statements that you've made, so plotting out the structure of the narrative that you're going to say and what the key points that you need to make in the order that you need to make them is really important. And hopefully at the end, you've got some kind of interesting conclusion and a ta-da moment that they will take away from that. Now, the important difference here from kind of writing a story that might come out for a film as opposed to a paper is that we're not making up stories. We are presenting research. So the big difference here is that when you get to each of your kind of logical statements and your key points in here, all of those have to be supported by evidence. So this is the point where we're actually bringing in our data. So we were talking here about data visualization. So why is this important? The root for this is that we as humans are not good at evaluating data. Here's some data. Have a look at those, just as a basic. Which is higher from that, the wild type or the knockout? Okay? They're a bit different, but it's really hard to tell. Okay? We are not good at interpreting even relatively small amounts of data. What we are very good at is interpreting visual representations of data. So if I take that same data and I plot it out in a visual representation, within a fraction of a second, you can look at that and take some interpretation. So when we are putting papers together and we're building figures for those papers, what we're doing is making our data accessible. And learning how to do that effectively is one of the key things for getting people to believe the story that you're telling them. Joe's just talked through some of the sort of steps involved, and one of the things I would like to try and encourage you to do is to make life easy for the people who are going to judge your science, okay? I've put on here a slightly haggard-looking editor. They don't all look like that. Some of them are very handsome. But it's a tough job, and they get a lot of grief from people who are very stressed about getting their work done, and reviewers who are reviewing your paper are busy people. They don't have a lot of time to do this. They've got lots of other stuff. They want to do their own science and their own research. So if you can make their life easy, things are going to go better for you. And some things are really trivial to do. So for example, when you've selected your journal and you're putting together your paper and your figures for your paper, go and read the instructions from the journal and read them carefully, because one of the easiest ways to fall over is that there are instructions that the journal gives you and you don't do it and your paper's going to immediately get kicked back off that. It's also going to save you time. Some journals are quite lax, well not lax, but not very specific in the guidelines they have for how papers should be structured or how figures should be prepared. Other journals are extremely specific. They're going to tell you what fonts you use, what sizes they're going to be, what shading you can have in your figures, how you should prepare certain things, how numbers should be formatted. And if you read those from the start and you do it as you're putting things together, relatively straightforward. If you get to the end and you've got all of your figures and everything put together and they go, yeah, but you've got to change all of these things in all of your figures, a right pain. So save yourself some effort. Read the rules for the journal you're submitting to, and then put things together. For the reviewer, reviewers want to like your paper. If you've done any reviews, or even just when you read a paper, you don't go into it generally going, oh, no, I'm going to give this a kicking. You generally want to believe the story that they're doing. And there is nothing more satisfying than reading a paper, and as you go through, it's well written, it's logically constructed, you can understand everything that's there. When they get to a statement, they go and look at figure 1, and you look at figure 1, and like 2 seconds later, you're going, yeah, okay, I believe that. You're rooting for them. What that then means is that when you get to the bit at the end where they're pushing it a bit and they're going, well, we think this could mean that it extends to this, and you know that you're chancing your arm a bit and it's a bit speculative. If you're on their side and you like it, you're going to go, okay, I'm going to let them get away with that. If they've given you a real struggle to get to that point, and then when you get to the contentious bit, you're going to check out, or if you're a reviewer, you're going to get your big red pen out and go, no, come on, we don't do this. So it's in everyone's interest to make this easy. One of the easiest things we can do is making figures which are clear and easy to interpret. So there's a lot you can say about this, but some basic things in here. When you're making figures, know why you are making a figure. What does that figure need to do? What point is it going to convey? The best figures are clean and simple. They do one thing, they do it well, and then they get out. Make sure figures are interpretable on their own. You don't have to get all the nuances, but they should have enough labeling and annotation that you can tell what the axes are, you can tell what the colors mean, and you know roughly what data is in there without having to go digging figure legends or digging the paper. Okay, so make it well enough annotated. Make it readable. The number of times you get a figure, and even with the stuff that you're squinting or getting your glasses out to go and try and read the text on there, something as simple as making sure all the text is readable is there. Putting sensible amounts of data in. I know you've collected a lot of data and you want to show the world that you've had all of this data. You don't need to show all of it. You show what's needed to put the figure in, which means not summarizing too much so that they just have to trust you. You show enough data that you can illustrate that what summaries you're putting on there are fair and real, but you show it in a summarized enough form that you don't have to work hard to interpret it. So summarize for clarity, but put in enough data for transparency and to show that you're not fudging it. And then finally, things like accessible colours. There's a stat that if you get 3 male European reviewers for your paper, which is not entirely unlikely, there's about a 20% chance one of them is colourblind. So making things colour accessible is simple. And then statistics, yes, important, but on top of what's there. There are so many examples of figures that are not great. We've just put a few up on here. These are all from Nature or Cell papers. So things that with way too much data on it. This one, lovely figure. What's the axis? Doesn't tell you what it's measuring. It's probably in the paper somewhere, but it's not there. This one, someone want to read what the axis label is on there? Yeah, no, that was in a paper. And this one, yeah, perfectly good figure, but it's in red and green. So if you're colourblind, you don't need to use red and green for this. There's only 2 colours on there. You can pick something that works. Final one, just to say, something else that is increasingly common is that if you are producing code as part of your project, that could be analysis code, or maybe you've written an app to do this alongside, then as well as publishing your paper, you should also publish the code. And that also is a place where you can make life easy for people. We do it with Bioinformatics group, so we do a lot of publishing of code. And if you go to the code repository, things that will make your life easier for a reviewer, put nice, clear instructions on the repository, a nice README, make it look pretty and look professional. Make sure that the licensing for your code is clearly stated, okay, because it will be important for this. If you want people to run your code, make it easy for them to do. Nice, clear installation instructions with a small, easy to install and easy to run test data set that doesn't take very long. If they've got 5 minutes, they'll download it, download the thing, run exactly the commands you give them, and if it all works smoothly, you get a big tick. If it doesn't work smoothly, then the amount of time someone is going to spend trying to debug that is going to be small before they're just going to kick it back to you and go, no, it doesn't work. Final slide, validation. Validation is a very generic term, but what it means is that your work is going to get judged by other people. And you can either control that or you can leave it up to chance. Up to chance is, I've prepared my stuff here and I'm going to give it to the journal and they're going to find reviewers and they're going to read it and they're going to judge it. Validation is you finding someone else, not someone in your lab or someone involved in your work, because they know it all already, they've seen it in lab presentations, but somebody else, another scientist, to read through your paper, read your figures, and give you feedback in the way that a reviewer would. You can find a mutual exchange thing and say, did you understand it? Did you get the message from this? Was the figure easy to understand? And if you can go through a couple of rounds of that, could you install my code and run it? If not, what fell over? Going through that process will iron out some of the obvious things that reviewers might pick up on, the obvious problems in there, the things that are not easy to understand, which just means you have a smoother time of going through when you get into the formal process. So I'll stop there and let other people go.
On to you, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you also for the invitation. There were so many great suggestions already here, and many of these I already discuss and suggest in our longer publishing talks that we provide. Here I have only 10 minutes, so what I want to do is first talk a bit about our team. So I'm an editor at PLOS Biology. We are a relatively small journal. We have 7 editors at the moment who handle manuscripts. One front half editor, which is Joe, and Nonya, our editor-in-chief, who doesn't handle manuscripts at the moment. And all the manuscripts that you will submit to our journal will be read by one of us. And if you know which journal you want to submit your work to, or want some pre-submission advice, for example, about scope, about relevance of your work, look up the website of the journal, try to find a suitable editor, and feel free to contact them in advance about suitability of your work, for example. We are all human beings. We want you to talk to us, to discuss problems, to discuss potential issues. For example, if your manuscript has already been reviewed, I don't know, 4 or 5 times at another journal, can we do something with this? These are things we're happy to discuss before the submission. And if the journal, I know not all do this, but if they provide information about the editor's email addresses, feel free to contact them. For us, you can, for example, also book Zoom meetings to discuss more complex issues, and we are more than happy to do that. The second point I wanted to talk about today is a bit on, from the inside, how we work with the manuscript that gets submitted to us and what's actually happening. At PLOS Biology, we have a fairly straightforward initial submission process. You need only to submit a PDF, basically, that contains the cover letter and the manuscript file. We don't need any author information, any email addresses apart from one corresponding author, no affiliations and metadata to make this initial step as easy for you as possible. And with this, we have all the information we need to make the initial assessment. At PLOS Biology, we have a hybrid editorial model. So we have the staff in-house editors. We will read all the manuscripts, as I mentioned before, and about half of the manuscripts which we think are not suitable for our journal, we will reject, as mentioned before. And the other manuscripts, which we think may have potential, we discuss with one of our academic editors. We have a huge academic editorial board, which consists of PIs working in the lab, working in the areas where we receive submissions in. So if we think a manuscript has potential, we will discuss this with an academic editor working in the field, and they will advise us if the manuscript is generally suitable. They will also suggest reviewers, so helping us with this aspect as well. This additional communication step, so I've previously worked at Nature Communications, Cell Reports, and other journals, for example. We didn't have this academic board in the background, and the challenge with this model is that it takes a bit longer because we always have at least one additional communication step when discussing initial submissions and making the decision whether to send something out to review or not. Sometimes academic editors are on holiday or not available, then we need to contact someone else. So this can take a bit longer. But still, you usually have the initial decision for our journal back within a week. Sometimes it's 10 days, but it's in that range. Depending on the advice of the academic editor, we may still reject your manuscript at this stage. If we send it out to review, we will send the manuscript back to you and then ask you to provide all the additional information about all the author names, email addresses, institutions, and so on, because we need this information to check for conflicts of interest, for example. Then you will, when we have your manuscript back, you will maybe have provided reviewer suggestions, which we are happy to take into account. I'm happy to answer any questions with more details about that. We honor reviewer exclusions, and we also have the reviewer suggestions from the academic editor, and also our knowledge of the field, where we can approach a few people we have worked with together before as a reviewer, for example. And we will start inviting reviewers. Usually they have about 2 weeks to submit their reports. In reality, it takes them probably more 3 weeks, sometimes longer. And this is also the step which takes the longest. Sometimes I just had a paper where I had to invite 35 reviewers, I think, to get 3 reviewers for this manuscript. But I can't invite 30 people at once. So I have to wait until I get a response or not, invite the next person, and so on. And this can easily take 2, sometimes 3, 4 weeks, or even longer, until I have the full reviewer panel I need for this paper. So this adds a huge amount of time, depending on how quickly we are able to find the reviewers. Our target is to get the decision back to the authors within 40 days. Usually it is a bit longer at the moment. And how this works is when we get the review reports, we will read them, see if they are constructive, if they provide the information that we need. And if this is the case, we will ask or send all review reports to the other reviewers and ask them if they have additional comments. We call this cross-commenting, which can be useful, for example, if one reviewer was overly harsh or another reviewer may have missed something. And this way we get additional feedback on the review reports and validity of the claims, for example. And when we have all this information, we summarize it and send this to the academic editor and discuss the decision with them. This is usually either a major revision, where we ask you to usually provide additional experimental data. This can be a minor revision, where no further experiments are needed, but just some textual revisions, for example, or a reject decision after review when the claims are not sufficiently supported, too many control experiments are missing, and so on. There's also a decision in the middle, which we call open reject, where we were quite interested in the paper. The reviewers indicated a lot of interest, and the academic editor as well. But there were so many concerns and issues raised that we don't think it's the most productive way for you to proceed publication with us, because you would need to invest too much time, resources, and so on, and money potentially. Then we say, we are interested, if you have the data already, we offer you to look at the manuscript again if you can resubmit, or if you are very keen and want to do the experiments, we are happy to do so. But at this time, we close the submission and you may submit it somewhere else. When we usually give you 3 months for a revision at PLOS Biology, so we ask only for a revision if this is usually feasible within this time frame. When we get your revision in, we will read it, have you addressed the reviewer concerns, is the manuscript improved and in a better shape. Then we discuss this revision with the academic editor, and because they have the scientific background, which we don't have in all the fields, because I handle papers across all of neuroscience, so I don't have the specific expertise in all the technical details. But the academic editors have, and they can often advise us on the revision directly. So they can say, in my view, the reviewer concerns are addressed. We don't need to send this back to the reviewers. This saves them this endless round of revision and re-review, which may only because one of the reviewer has a technical concern or maybe a slightly different point of view, where it's more a subjective discussion, but which doesn't affect the main message of the paper. And this is a way how we try to avoid this. After your paper has been accepted, as mentioned before, this will go to our production office. And then after your paper has been published, we also help you with promoting your paper. We will, for example, send it to people in the field who work in your subject area and help to promote it this way. We post it on social media. We post it on our personal social media channels, for example, and talk about the papers at conferences. I've mentioned this already. And was it something else? Yeah, a few numbers, because we often ask about that. So we send about 16% of the papers out to review that are submitted to us. So we are highly selective. Of the papers we send out to review, about 2/3 are asked or invited to submit a revised manuscript. And once you are at this stage, your chances of being published are relatively high. More than 90% of the revised manuscripts are finally accepted. Do I have some time?
Yeah, you have a couple minutes.
This is a few more details about how we assess manuscripts and what we look into. The first question is always about scope. Look at the journal websites. What is their scope? For example, I work at PLOS Biology. As the name indicates, we are interested in biological research. So if you submit an engineering paper to us, which I have handled those papers before for other journals, I like them. But even if I think it's the greatest paper of all, I cannot send it out to review because it's not within our scope. Then the next point is a research question. Is a question you are addressing in your paper, and this also goes back to the storytelling to make this clear. What is your paper about? What is the story? Is this an interesting question? Are people interested in this? Do you reveal a new insight into something, or is it a rather incremental advance, adding maybe some minor bit to a fairly established signaling pathway, for example? As a broad scope journal, PLOS Biology, we are also interested in papers that are of interest not only to the specific subfield of your research, but are of interest to a broader audience. If you submit to us your paper, for example, a neuroscience paper I handle, a microbiologist doesn't need to be able to fully understand the paper, but still they should understand the question and why the question is interesting, even if it's not your field. Then other things are the overall level of experimentation, how detailed, how thorough, how comprehensive is your study, what is the level of mechanistic insight you provide. We are interested in studies that explain why things are happening. For example, if you submit a paper about an anatomical study describing in a mouse brain a new pathway between brain regions via immunostainings, this is interesting and deserves to be published, but we want to know what is this pathway for, in which behavioral context is it important, does it have a pathophysiological relevance. And as a final point, we are also looking into, we are checking that your research complies with our editorial policies. For example, if your research includes human research participants, there are certain procedures and protocols you need to follow, and the same with animal research as well. And the role of the referee is to tell us, are the claims supported overall, and is your paper of sufficient quality, are the data conclusive, and so on. And I've discussed this with some of you over lunch already. We see our role as not, we are kind of gatekeepers, but my role is not to keep papers out. It's much more fun for me publishing good papers. But I can't publish all the papers that are submitted. So my role is to select the best papers, the most suitable papers for the journal I am in at the moment, and help you publish the best possible version of the paper in our journal. And yeah,
great.
That's it.
Thank you
very much.
So we've got just over 20 minutes for questions, and I can see hands coming up already, so I think I'll go to the audience. I have a couple just in case we run out of audience questions, but yeah, I see one over there, Sarah.
Hi everyone, thank you for your great explanations. My name is Sujin from Imperial College London. And then 2 days ago, one of our papers, organ-specific proteomic age paper, was accepted from the Journal of Prevention of Alzheimer's Disease. And then everybody expressed happiness, but as a corresponding author, just a little bit overwhelming because after acceptance, I just want to know how smoothly go to the post-acceptance process. Whether it's, anyway, the paper was already accepted, but do we need another stage of quality control, like another type of proofreading or the figure checking, or any other process needed? Thank you very much.
So, I don't know, Joe.
Do you want me to take that? Well, congratulations. That's very exciting. So, in my experience, there is some proofreading steps. Most of the time, the figures, when my papers have got to this stage, figures have been fine, but there is some proofreading, formatting, those kind of things, and they need to go around the co-authors as well. So it's also checking all the details of co-authors, that kind of thing. So I'm afraid your journey is not finished yet. There are a few steps.
How much variation allowed? Because the paper already reviewed and accepted. So,
I mean, as I said, I think it's formatting and typos and that kind of thing. It's definitely, you can't change data or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just making sure that the layouts that are there, that we've seen things where bits of text have got rearranged when it's got put into the final order, or just sizes of things don't line up or whatever. So minor changes.
Right. Just down there.
Thanks a lot. That was very, very useful. I have 2 questions, if you don't mind. The easy one is, what's the value of preprints, and why do certain journals want you to preprint your paper before it goes out? And the more complicated question would be, in academia, why is it that reviewers don't get paid to review papers? And when is this going to change? What's your opinion?
I mean, I can guess an answer to that.
Do you want to start on that?
I can. The first question, I think preprints are really useful and helpful to make the knowledge available before it's published in a journal. And I see this in my work daily. Even if it's published in a closed journal, I can't access the paper, which I may need to read to assess novelty of a manuscript submitted to us. And if it's pre-printed, great, I can read it as well. And also, for example, I often scan preprint servers to see if there's something exciting posted and ask authors to submit. So there's benefit for authors and others as well. For the payment issue, I think this is quite complex. There are many studies into this. One is if you start to pay reviewers, you get a certain panel of reviewers who may be more interested in getting the money than having the right expertise to review your paper. So this is one issue. Another issue, which is more we are a non-profit organization, so for us, we still would need to have the money to pay the reviewers. But this is obviously more important for commercial publishers who don't want to get their income decreased by this. But it's also a quite complex issue because then you need to have a contract with every single reviewer set up with their institution. Not much money may actually get to the reviewer because of taxes and everything. And you need to introduce a lot of quality control. So at what level do you think, this review is not sufficient, I don't pay this review, and so on. So there's a lot of logistical, financial, and also, I would say, maybe conceptual issues if you want to really ask only these reviewers who review for financial benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just one thing to add to that. I would say the issue of preprints is there's definitely advantages to it. It can be slightly contentious. Certainly in my field, I know that there have been a number of studies that kind of came out on bioRxiv and generated a lot of social media interest, a lot of interest, and never actually ended up being published. And they're often cited in other publications as if they are kind of peer-reviewed publications, and some of them have really quite fundamental problems that aren't always kind of acknowledged, and they get subsumed into the body of knowledge without actually really going through the same process. So one of the things that we try and do is to kind of make sure that our sort of staff and students are very clear on the difference between reading something on a preprint server versus something that has gone through peer review.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm using the Grammarly for my editing my writings. Do you think that this can be acceptable, or it can be find out like AI using or something? This can be useful. Thank you.
Christian, do you
Yeah,
think?
sure. So this depends a bit on the publisher. So you should check the publisher or journal website. But usually for this kind of writing support, this is accepted. For some journals, it needs to be acknowledged that you have used this kind of support, and then it's fine. If most journals, however, will not allow you to use generative AI, for example, to generate figures, to generate the actual content, this is a different discussion. But support for writing, for translating, for example, is usually fine.
Mm-hmm.
There was a very interesting report come out this week. I imagine a bit of Googling will turn it up, where somebody did a textual analysis of papers that have come out over the last few years, because there are certain grammatical tics that large language models do, and you can search for certain combinations of words or certain types of punctuation and look at the frequency, and they are going like that. So people are definitely using them for these purposes, whether or not they should and how that affects your data, but yeah, people definitely do.
So there's another question down there.
Going back to the earlier stage of the process, journal selection feels like a bit of a dark art to me, and I don't know if if there's any tips to master the dark art, and also if there's anything a bit more systematic that you'd recommend. I suppose like conglomerations of respected journals, or at least journals that aren't basically, money farms. I'd be interested in your viewpoints.
Joe, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll start with that. So, I think everyone thinks you pick the highest impact factor and you work your way down, but you've got to think about the scope of the journal and also the audience that you're targeting. And I think that, in my mind, is a lot more important than the impact factor. And also, as you point out, there are some journals that people prefer to go with and some that they prefer to stay away from. That's your own, values, if you like, informing that decision. Certainly for us, we think about in, the field that we are funding, that we are researching, the Alzheimer's molecular biology synapse field. What are the journals that are most read by others in the field? And not necessarily going on impact factor. I think you also have to be realistic, right? So, you will know if your paper, if it is suitable for one of the top journals, fine. But I think you've got to gauge it. And if it's not, then you're just going to waste everyone's time. So make sure you pick something that's realistic and that it's in scope, basically.
Great. Does anyone do you want to jump in?
Maybe one point to add is it's also useful to know in advance what do you want. Do you need the paper published in, half a year or a year? Yeah. Or do you have a story which is worth having in revision and review for 3 years? Because depending on the journal, if you submit to Cell, Nature, Science, and reviewers suggest an additional experiment, which may be tangential to your study, but there you will be usually asked to do this experiment and address every reviewer concern. At other journals, they may be more suitable because they help you to publish the paper you want to publish and not the reviewer's paper. And then you are maybe a bit faster and have your paper published within, half a year or 9 months, opposed to a few years. And these are also helpful considerations depending on the resources you have in the lab and the time you are able to invest.
I guess I kind of have a follow-up question for the whole panel is, when ECRs are looking for journals, how do they avoid any predatory or kind of questionable journals?
In my view, if you get an email that's dear esteemed professor and it's a journal of concrete science or something, I don't know, random, that's not the one for you. Generally, if they email me, I don't go for it.
Okay.
Totally that.
Okay.
Yeah, and looking at what your colleagues publish in, and these are usually the respectable journals, and do they have, I don't know, if you don't know the journal and you work in the field, it's probably already a bad sign, but check the websites, check the reference list, are these papers cited, for example, all of these things can indicate an appropriate journal versus a predatory journal.
Yeah. Was there any?
Hi, very interesting talk, very helpful, thank you. So I personally think it's quite important to have reviewers' comments published. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about it. Thank you.
Yeah, do you want
So we at PLOS Biology, we publish the review reports if the authors opt in. So the authors have the opportunities to say, no, we don't want this. But if the authors opt in, we publish them, and I agree, it's really useful. It can be really interesting to read them, to see, also to learn how the paper ended up being the paper it is now. Also, there are often lots of interesting discussions between reviewers, authors, the editors, which can be helpful for understanding the paper and also identify research questions. When there's, for example, discussed, this is something which the authors claim, but which isn't actually described in another paper. This is an open question for now, for example.
Yeah, we've published in the past in journals that do completely open review, so the reviewers identify themselves and the paper is published immediately, or at least open immediately. It's not assigned a PubMed accession, and then the reviews come in. It's a very interesting way of doing it, and it leads to quite sort of civil discussions about the paper. But I completely understand there are also pressures. So if you're a relatively junior person reviewing something of a more senior group, you're always slightly concerned about the extent of criticism you can put in. So I think it's nice that different models are being experimented with and trying different things out.
So, question about kind of formatting when it comes to papers. So I've had two experiences recently. One with a journal that offered a LaTeX style file, which meant that kind of that did it for you, if you know what I mean, as long as you know how to code in LaTeX. And it was a lot easier than another experience I've had where I was doing it all on Word myself. Are things moving in the direction where you might have style files for journals which do it for you, or is it very much just hit and miss that some do, some don't?
In my experience, I mean, the formatting is a tricky question. So we at PLOS Biology, we don't care how your paper looks like as long as it's a paper with abstract figures and the sections. We work with you during the revision process to get the paper in the shape we needed for publication. We've heard before other journals are quite specific. And in my experience, if you would offer most authors the option to have a LaTeX template, I think most would go away because they don't know how to use it if they're not in usually more computational areas. I don't think, and the systems, the production systems between the journals differ quite a lot. I think there may be some communities where this is possible, but for example, for us, publishing across all areas of biology, from ecology to bioinformatics, is quite tricky to get one format and one template for all areas.
Yeah, I've seen some journals that have given kind of Word templates as well. I've done that. I think the only thing I really like about that is the interleaving of the figures within the paper. When you're trying to review a paper and you've got a big block of text and then you have to jump like 20 pages ahead to go and find the figures and put it in, is a bit of a pain. So there's potentially technical advantage to that, but yeah.
Is there a question over there? Yeah.
I was wondering, as a researcher that works in a multidisciplinary environment, like many of you, I was wondering if you had any perspective on this when it comes to publishing, and you have a interdisciplinary paper, maybe you touch a bit of different topics, also talking about formats and talking about what to write and how to make it understandable for the wider audience. So I just wanted to ask for your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I've had a couple in that kind of situation. Again, I think it's what is your main take-home message from the paper, and thinking very carefully about what your audience is. So I've done where I've got a lot of imaging, PET and MRI imaging, but in neuroscience. So do I go for a neuroscience journal or a PET MR journal? And again, it depends on what your story is and what is the message you're trying to get out. And I think you can do it either way. I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule for it, but really think about what is your end goal here.
Yeah, you can also look at, adding to that, where's the main advance of your paper? For example, if it's more on we get many papers where there's a methodological advance, which is in neuroimaging, for example, fMRI. But if there's no biological novelty there, we wouldn't be able to publish it because the neuroimaging community who reads our journal is just not big enough. So then we would reject and suggest transferring to a neuroimaging journal. But if you use the new methods to present new biological findings or pathophysiological findings, then we would be very interested in that. So if you have this kind of message, you need to make it clear how you use this and how this moves the field forward.
Just very quick one. I just wondered what can cause a delay of publication after acceptance? Because my experience last year, after accepting my paper, that's PLOS one, and then it took over 6 months for that to be published, which I think could some of the currency of what you've written may have been lost. So what could lead to that?
Yeah, 6 months is certainly too long. So I don't know what happened in this specific case. So I can't comment on this. And I don't know enough about PLOS one, how this worked there. This depends on the journal. Most journals will publish these figures on their website, so you can often find them. And some journals will put the paper out almost immediately after acceptance in a proofreading stage. So it will be available online relatively soon. And I think for us it's something like a month, also depending, of course, how quickly the authors are able to return proofs and work on the figures and so on. But I think a month is probably fairly normal if it's not put online immediately after acceptance.
As an early career researcher, what would be for early career researchers, what would be your advice in terms of when and where to start to pick my journal? Because obviously, as Dr. Jackson said, we start from the writing and then blah, 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 blah. But because there is a format to follow for the specific journal, so would you start like, I think I want to publish on that, so even before I write my paper, I'll start aiming for that? Or it comes at the end, once it's written or in the process? Just as for early career researchers, advice.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of journals now, the initial submission does not really require specific formatting. So having said that, I think you should have in mind roughly where you're going to send it or what type of journal, because then as you write it, the style in which you write it, as we said, the take-home messages, your target audience, you need to bear all of that in mind as you write. So you should have an idea really from as early as possible, I would say.
I think as soon as you know what your story is going to be, then part of that is kind of how you're going to pitch it, because then picking the journal and the format of article is also going to put constraints on the sort of length you have to discuss and the number of figures you can put in and all that sort of stuff. So I think as soon as you're at that point, then be thinking about that.
And it depends a lot on how much or how you write your abstract, for example. If you write for a targeted audience in, I don't know, for example, Journal of Neuroscience, or if you submit your paper to Nature, where you basically expect every reader across all sciences to understand your abstract and get something out of it. So there's also some practical component to it.
I know we've got only 1 minute left, but I do have a quick round of questions, and I'm looking at my colleagues and they're all like screaming. But do you think publishing is becoming more or less supportive for ECRs? And whatever that answer is, do you think there's anything that needs to change? So I'll start with you, Joe.
The thing I've noticed recently that I really like is getting ECRs involved in the review process. So in that sense, I'd say it's more supportive.
Great, thank you.
I mean, I think as long as I've been involved in science, everyone's always thought that publishing should change, but they never quite agree on how. So it is an imperfect system, but it does work reasonably well, and there are sort of a lot of good faith efforts to try and improve this. So I think there are good signs for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the system overall is improving towards getting early career researchers involved more, be it as corresponding authors, so they're exposed to the submission process and the revision process earlier, but also by inviting them as reviewers, either as co-reviewers with a PI or as independent reviewers. And we, for example, always like to have also more junior people because they give a different perspective than some really senior established PI.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panel. Can we have another round of applause for all of them? They will all